Hi, George Cavallo, retired Coast Guard rescue swimmer and warrant officer. And then after I did that, I moved on to photography. I went to the Seattle Art Institution on my GI Bill, and now I'm a professional photographer and fine art painter. I actually paint for the Coast Guard art program. My painting's not in this show. There's some 3,000 paintings that the Coast Guard has and puts out all along the nation for folks to view. So if you get a chance to go downstairs, I think there's 50 of them throughout the building, and they're amazing. They only accept about 30 pieces of art each year. So get a chance to look at those, that would be great. So I was hoping there was only going to be like 6 people and 1 bottle of wine, and we were just going to pass it around. So it's going to throw me off a little bit. But I want to thank you for joining me today. I love talking about the Coast Guard. I love talking about the mission of the Coast Guard. That was the best 20 years of my life. I know Steve did probably more than 30 or 40 years in the Coast Guard. He's got quite a bit. Any other coasties in here? No more coasties, just one? So, but yeah, I love talking about it and the mission and the things we do, and it's exciting and a lot of fun. And I didn't feel like I worked for 20 years, but you know, I'm realizing as I get older, some of the stuff I did was just crazy, and the dangers that were involved in it. They actually just crashed a helicopter Monday, Coast Guard helicopter in Sitka. 2 of the airmen are here at Harborview. They medevaced them in, and the other 2, the pilots, were released within a couple of days. These guys are expected to live. They're just banged up pretty good. The helicopter hit the trees, flipped upside down on an island, and these guys had a good fall and went through a pretty traumatic thing. So it just reinforces my decision to move on and get out of the Coast Guard. But you know, it is a younger man's game, and I had a lot of fun doing it. I just wanted to tell you, this book really started as a personal endeavor, inspired by my son's curiosity about my rescue swimmer experiences. He would come over to the house all the time and ask us, you know, tell this story, Dad, tell that story. So I started writing them all down. And before I knew it, I had 25, 30 stories and culled them into a book and got them edited, and it was amazing. I didn't think that was something that was gonna, when I started with a pencil and paper writing these down, that someday that they, 8, 9 years later, would be a book. So I'm excited that it's out and out there. I was just going to say that that writing also, there was some turmoil in my life that you'll read about in the book, that writing these stories for me was a way to escape, and it was a sanctuary. So, and I'm not sure I would do anything different. I think all the things that happened to me made me the better person that I am today. And so as you read the book, there are some shocking surprises inside of it, and I wouldn't change a thing, and I'm happy that it happened the way it did. So I wanted to talk to you today. So I was trying to think. Last time I was here, I talked about the King 5 crash. A really good friend of mine, Bobby Vogel, the sole survivor, and I wanted to try and do something a little different today. I wanted to talk about 2 stories. One of what got me to join the Coast Guard, what was the catalyst for that, and then I want to tell you about one of the most horrific and horrifying rescues that I did, where I thought that was it for me, that this was going to be the end of the line. So I think I've got 2 good stories for you. The first one, I grew up in Sarasota, Florida, and I was a beach kid. I didn't really go to school. I went surfing, I spearfished, I was scuba diving, got my certification at 15 years old, and I just loved the water. The water was everything. Having a couple of parents that weren't really too involved, I was able to just run free. And I started, one day I bought a sailboat, sight unseen, and I got it delivered to the front yard, and it was a catamaran, a Venturer, 15-footer. I didn't even know they made those. And I bought a book. I was 15 years old, so I bought this book, and I put this thing together, and I tried to rig it, and I threw it behind the car, drug it to the beach, took it out, and it was just a small lapping waves on the shore, a light breeze. I thought this is going to be the perfect time to practice this whole sailing thing. You know, I read a couple of chapters on sailing, so I had enough knowledge to be dangerous. I had absolutely no survival gear. I didn't even have a life jacket. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I mean, I broke every rule of going out in a boat. And but at 15, you know, I knew better. So I pushed this thing off and I headed out, and it had a jib on the front and a mainsail. And you know, it's a catamaran, so I'm on the transom, and I'm trying to figure this thing out, and I'm moving lines, and I'm just, all of a sudden the wind kind of kicks up a little bit. You can kind of feel it come off, and the thing just, you know, flaps open and the boat takes off, and I'm like, oh, this is great, I've got this. And before I know it, I'm really starting to move, and as I get farther offshore, the wind's picking up more and the boat's cruising, and now I have to figure out how to turn. So I crank this thing around and it goes dead stop. And slowly, I remember I read something about tacking, so I turned it back and I slowly started agonizingly way back, and then all of a sudden I got a good run towards shore, but the wind was kicking up pretty good, and as I was coming in, I could see that my trailer, which was on the beach, because this is probably about a 3-hour span that I was out there, so I could tell that my trailer had somehow, I'm doing my, I think you have to go 2 slides. One more. Yeah, so my trailer had sunk. The tide had come in a little bit and it was completely underwater, and so I was preoccupied with that, and I was going at a pretty good clip, which I wasn't really sure how that was working with the wind, and I was trying to figure out the wind, and I looked over and I saw this redhead in the water as I was getting closer to shore, and I saw a shark fin heading straight for the redhead. And as I squinted and got closer, it was a dog. And the dog was paddling for its life, and this fin is coming at it. And so now I'm preoccupied with the dog, the trailer, the wind, the sailboat, and I hear yelling and screaming. And as I look forward, well, this empty beach 4 hours ago was now full of people. And so now I'm trying to move this sailboat with, I mean, a couple of people, I just, you know, set the sponsons on either side of them and went over them. And I was like, oh, good God, I'm going to kill someone. There's a dog back here with a shark headed at it. My trailer's sunk. And now I don't know how to stop this thing. And I'm trying to grab lines. I know I need to loosen everything. That'll help. And before I can figure that out, somehow I had lined up with that trailer, and I had ran the boat right up on the trailer and docked it. I mean, it looked like I knew what I was doing. I rolled off this thing. My heart's pounding. I'm still thinking about the shark and the dog. And I run towards, and there's a group of folks that gathered on shore, and they're staring out at this dog with the shark fin headed straight for it. And so I'm starting to yell and scream, and we need to, and we should, and maybe I could go out there. We got to get that dog. And this kind lady just turns around and she says, honey, he's fine. That's Sasha. Sasha comes every afternoon at 3 o'clock, and a dolphin comes out and plays with her. And holy crap, we sat there and watched that dolphin and that dog play for 45 minutes, frolicking, and I was like, what the heck? And then I had just read, this was some years ago, because I'd always wondered what happened to Sasha. Sasha passed away, and you know, for almost 2 years, that dolphin came every day at 3 o'clock looking for Sasha. That's crazy, huh? So that's my lighthearted story. Get you guys ready to go. You can go to the next slide. Too late on the fin, dang it. So after that, I had taken the boat out a couple more times and gotten a little more comfortable with it. And I was supposed to pick up a couple of girls from high school and take them out on the boat. And me and a buddy had met at the boat the morning of. Again, I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't have a life jacket. I was not, excuse me, not prepared. And Jim and I headed out, And I said, you know what, let's take the boat out for a quick run before we get the girls. You know, I got to get my sea legs, make sure that I can impress them with this boat. And so we head out offshore, and again, the wind's picking up. And I had never put that catamaran up on one sponson or pontoon, and the winds were just right. And we took a line off of the mast and just wrapped it around our hands, and I brought it up on one, and we were standing on this thing, hooting and hollering, and we thought we were the, you know, cats meow. We had this thing going, and the front sponson hit a wave, pitched both of us airborne, snapped the mast on the sailboat, and rolled it upside down. And this is about 6 or 7 miles offshore. And of course, we swim back to the boat, immediately swim down to the cooler, check our beer situation, bring that back up. This was the 80s, so, you know, drinking was 18. So maybe we were 16 or 17, but we were getting a good start on it. And, you know, we were on that boat for, I'd say, about 6 hours. And Jim, my companion and classmate, he had suggested, of course, at this point, I knew a lot about the water, but not boating to this extent, that he should swim to shore. And I thought, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Before I knew that, he had jumped in and started to swim. And by the grace of God, he got about 100 yards, 200 yards away, looked at shore, which was this big, looked at the boat, looked at shore, looked at the boat, and swam back. Because I don't think he would be here today if he didn't. So we were on that boat for quite a while. Nightfall started to come. And of course, even in Florida, water will increase your hypothermia quite a bit. And so we were starting to get cold. And then just out of nowhere, I saw the bow of this boat coming at us. This is a 41-footer Coast Guard boat. And we just started hooting and hollering. We couldn't believe it. And they came and turned the boat over, hooked onto us, and was towing us back in. And I marveled at these. There were just like these 20-year-old kids, a few years older than me, running this boat, running around on deck. And I was like, man, I got to do that. And that was kind of the champagne moment for me, where I was like, I'm going to join the Coast Guard. And it was probably about, I think a few months later. I hadn't really done much with that, and I saw one of these Coast Guard commercials at like 3 in the morning with a Coast Guard helicopter flying around a tropical island, 1-800-GO-COAST GUARD. And so I called the number, and I immediately started getting things going. And do you know, 2 years later, I was in a Coast Guard helicopter in Puerto Rico flying around a tropical island. So somehow it all kind of worked out in the right way. Can we get the next slide? So once I joined the Coast Guard, I immediately knew, out of all the jobs you can do in there, and when I saw this one, helicopter rescue swimmer. And anybody see Top Gun, the original? Right? I made my girlfriend and her kids watch Top Gun. I think they're still angry at me, the original. It's a little quirky, but in there, a Coast Guard helicopter comes in, and a swimmer jumps out and rescues someone. And I knew from that day, when I saw that video, I was like, that's what I got to do. That's got to be my job. So can we have the next slide? I wanted to just, before I get in, I'm going to explain what Sharks and Daisies is, because it'll kind of make sense for the book as I keep telling the story. So Sharks and Daisies, once you go to rescue swimmer school, which they have about a 70% failure rate, so we would start at about 12, maybe graduate 4 in a class. And sometimes they'd even combine another class with them because they'd have so many people fail out. It was very tough. And one of the drills that they do in the pool is they would put after running us 6 miles, push-ups and doing sugar cookies, they like to have us do push-ups after we were all wet and sweaty in the sand, so that we would get sand everywhere. And then they'd have us roll to the right 5, roll to the left, more push-ups, and they called it sugar cookies. So of course you're chafing everywhere as you're trying to run with all this sand. So after doing all of this, they get us in the pool and they beat us up in the pool for a couple of hours. And they put us all in the middle, and the instructors start to swim in a circle around you, and we're kind of all facing in the middle at each other. And you just don't even know when an instructor is going to come up to you and grab you, put his arms around you, and act like a victim in the water. And he is the shark. And when he attacks you, immediately what you do is you take somebody who's panicking underwater, right? The last place somebody wants to be when they're panicking is underwater. So we immediately take them down, and we do some maneuvers that we were taught and release them, and hopefully get them in a chokehold around them and start to swim to the top. And when they wanted you to release them, they would pinch you, and that was the daisy. And I always thought about that when I was in the Coast Guard, and when I was doing this, I was like, that would be a great name of a book. And so as I wrote the book, I was like, I got to call it Sharks and Daisies. Can I get the next slide? Okay, don't start it yet. So the next story I'm going to tell you about is in Kodiak, Alaska. It was the pinnacle of my career. I had been in Clearwater, Florida, Puerto Rico, North Carolina, Elizabeth City. I had done all these other stations, Humboldt Bay, California. And when I got up to Kodiak, I had finally made chief, E7, and I was in charge of 25 type A maniacs who, it was like hurting, but they could get the job done. These guys were fit, and they were adrenaline junkies, and they were a lot of fun to be with, but it was a lot to corral 25 of these same-minded folks in one area. I'm going to tell you the story about what happened up in Alaska, and this was the case that I always feel like is the one where I felt like that was it, my life was over. But before I do that, I want you to watch this 2-minute video that I put together, because I want you to see the helicopter. I want you to see the crew that's involved in it, see the equipment. And so as I tell you the story, I think it's just going to make more sense if you've got like a visual of what this helicopter can do and what the crews look like and what the equipment involved is. This is the Coast Guard's H-60 Jayhawk. It's the Coast Guard version of the Black Hawk. I wanted you to see the waves. I was in 35-foot waves. These are 35 to 40-foot waves. So as I tell you the story, this is what you should picture what I had to deal with on that day I had to go in the water. You see that sailboat down there? It looks like a little toy compared to the size of those oceans. That's the basket that we use to pull people out of the water. That's the same helicopter that crashed up in Sitka. It's like I said, it's the same. They take it from the Navy. I think they call it, it's the Black Hawk, and then they modify it for the Navy and the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard, if you see right here, looks like torpedoes underneath. Those are 3 tanks. We bring the cabin forward and put fuel bladders in there, and then they put those external tanks, which they can drop, and those have fuel in it, so this aircraft can go 300 nautical miles off the coast, hover for 15 minutes, that's its requirement, rescue someone and come back. They've had some, when I was in North Carolina, we actually had to go a little bit farther, and we weren't able to make it home, so we actually had to turn and use a tailwind and go on to Bermuda and wait a week and a half until an aircraft carrier got halfway so we could land on it, refuel to make it back to Elizabeth City, North Carolina. But this thing is a beast. I had a pilot who was getting ready to retire, and we were on the runway, and he said, I want to just take it straight up to 10,000 feet. We were sitting on the runway. You mean like straight up? And he's like, yeah. And he just pulled collective on that thing, pitched the blades of the rotors, and that thing went from sitting on the runway to 10,000 feet in less than 2 minutes, and you could just feel your body from, I mean, it's just a powerhouse. It's an amazing aircraft. So that's the equipment and the rescue swimmers, and you saw the wave state. So now I'm going to tell you the story about what happened in when I was in Kodiak, Alaska. So I didn't actually have the duty. We stand, we're like a firehouse. We stand 1 in 4. So you'll come on at like noon and stay for 24 hours and maybe take the night flight or if there's a case. So you'll work that 24 hours like a fire truck. And then another crew will come on. And you try to do that every 4 days, every 6 days, depending on the amount of people you have. I didn't have duty, which is the way it always happens. And one of the guys had cut his finger and went to medical, and I was the chief of the shop, so I really didn't stand a lot of duty. I usually did a lot more of the management of the shop and the equipment. So of course, I took the duty, and it wasn't 20 minutes after this guy had driven away. And it was that Alaskan day where it was snotty. Can you do the next slide? That's our emblem for Kodiak. And then one more. So if you're not familiar where Kodiak is, this is Kodiak, Alaska. It's about 250 miles from Anchorage out in the Gulf of Alaska. Out here is the chain. And there's one last little island out here called Shimia. And it doesn't do it justice, because to go from Kodiak to Attu or Shimia, one of the end islands, it's like going from Florida to Cape Cod. So, and we covered that whole area, and it wasn't uncommon to have the deadliest catch guys, they operate out in this area. And we would usually put there's one little island out here called St. Paul, and we would actually put a helicopter there for the crabbing season. When you see the deadliest catch, there's usually a Coast Guard helicopter there, a bunch of Coast Guard ships to cover the fisheries out there. But it's not uncommon to fly a helicopter and hotchscotch down the islands and bring crews on C-130s and drop them off, so the 60 can fly, a crew can fly for 6 hours, and then they have to land, and they can't fly for 24 hours after that. So they'll fly it for 6, land it, swap out crews, fly it 6 more, land it, swap out a crew, go out, try and rescue some folks, come back and do the whole thing all the way back. So the vastness of Alaska covered by Kodiak, and then out on the little arm is Sitka, and it covers quite a bit too. It's very vast. Can we do another slide? Kodiak is a beautiful island. For 6 weeks every summer, I would not go anywhere else in the world. I wouldn't even go to Hawaii. It's so green. It's 20 hours of light. I was able to bring my girlfriend and her kids there this year. It was just magical. We saw a sow with bears, a sow bear crossing the road with her cubs. We caught salmon in the river. It was amazing. But in the wintertime, it is harsh. Next slide. That's the runway. So, and this is out on the ramp getting ready for a flight. And this was about the conditions of the day I'm going to tell you about. The alarm had gone off, and the helicopter was out on the ramp. So just to get to the helicopter, I had to put my ice cleats on, my parka, grab my bag, and I had to walk slowly, because ramp turns into an ice sheet. So I had my cleats on, and I got out to the helicopter, and they hadn't spun up yet. I was late getting there, and I'm like, why aren't, the engines were running, but the rotor head wasn't turning. And the pilot yelled back, he said, yeah, we're waiting for the winds to get below 85 knots so we can turn the head. The rules are you have to be below 85 to start the head spinning. So I was watching these blades dipping and bobbing, and I was sitting in the back, and I think it was 97 knots, well over 100 miles per hour. And I know in Florida they call that a hurricane, and everybody evacuates. And so I'm sitting in this helicopter waiting for the winds to get below 85 knots so that we can turn the head. And sure enough, it dipped. The pilot threw the brake off, and the blade started spinning. Okay, part one's done. Usually we taxi out because we're kind of heavy on fuel and take off like an airplane. But the helicopter, like I told you, has a lot of power, and the pilot's like, we just got a mayday from a Russian boat. Roduga was sinking 40 miles away, actually 40 miles away. By flight time, that's not that far. And the pilot has the head running now, spinning the head, and he says over the ICS, when I take off, it's going to be a complete whiteout, and we only have a ceiling of 300 feet. So we have up to about 30 feet, it's going to be nothing but whiteout, can't see anything, and then we're going to open up and have this little window up to 300 feet. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds good. So he pulls up, we fly over the hangar, and we start heading out to sea. As soon as we pass the island, or the runway, and we start to turn out to sea, we're not 10 minutes headed towards where this boat is yelling. And I'm on the radios now, and I hear the Mayday call. And there's nothing more wrenching than hearing somebody who knows their boat is sinking calling Mayday. And so I immediately dropped my headset, got down on one knee, and I have a bag with all my swimmer gear in it. And I was starting to do what I call put my get wet stuff on. So I was getting my fins and my mask and pulling all my stuff out of my bag. And I heard, it sounded like shrapnel hit the back of the helicopter. And I'm like, that's not a sound I usually hear. So I froze, and I heard two more, boom, 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 boom. And I had looked up at the flight mechanic, because that's kind of his wheelhouse, all the, mechanical stuff. And I could see his eyes were pretty big. And about the time we were going to hit our ICS and tell the pilot, one of the pilots said, oh shit, the anti-icing just failed. And the anti-icing, so these blades have a little pad on them, and they heat up, and it keeps ice from building on the blades. And they had failed, and ice was building up on the blades and slinging off and hitting the rear end of the helicopter. So on the good bad scale, that's very bad. And what's even worse is because ice is building up on these blades, it's changing the shape of the blade. So we're starting to lose altitude. And eventually we're going to lose all altitude because the blades are changing. So the pilot dips the nose over and says, I'm going to drop down lower and find warmer air. I'm like, sounds like a good plan. I'm not really saying much because he's on a roll. So we drop down to about 50 feet above the ocean, and the shrapnel in the back stops, and it's warmer air down there, so the blades aren't freezing as bad. Still freezing, but not as bad. We fly back to the air station, and they had pulled out another helicopter and had it running and the head turning on it, and we had landed, and I thought, well, this is great. This is somebody else's problem, not mine. And then they come on the radio, hey, they don't have crew for that plane. They're holding it for you. You guys got to get out of this one and run into that one. So we grab all our gear, and we run across the ice, and we get into this new plane and take off and do the same procedure up and over the hangar, out to sea. And 20 minutes maybe to get on scene. And I was putting my gear on, but I had glanced outside a couple times, and I saw the seas that you saw, maybe a little bit less than that, but not much. And my good bad meter was starting to peg. And I got all my gear together, and the pilot said they had seen a raft. And so we open the door, and I get on what's called a gunner's belt, and I slide up to the door, and the flight mechanic holds me, and he's got the hoist in case he needs it. And we're looking out at the scene. And there's a few times in the Coast Guard where I was especially when I was younger, I was like, I'm going in, my adrenaline, I want to see what's going on. This is a blast, I love this. Not today. I looked out at that ocean, and it looked like a washing machine. And this little raft was just being tossed around, and the ship, their ship was upside down. Both screws were out of the water turning, and the lights were still on. It was like something out of the Titanic, and I watched it as it sunk. And the pilot came on the ICS, and he said, "Hey, we're going to put you in." And I was like, and I can actually say at that point, I'm not. It's not safe. I'm not going. But I don't really know many rescue swimmers that would not go in on that. And I had guys in a raft below me. I had to do it, but I wouldn't be honest if I didn't tell you I was scared, very scared when I saw what this was looking like. But I said, "Roger that, sir," and I took my stuff off and I got ready to go. Now, a helicopter hovering over 30-foot seas, and it becomes a dance between the pilot and the flight mechanic, and the little raft is down here, and so that the helicopter the pilots are amazing. You know, I always told the pilots and flight mech, if I saved a person, they always saved two, because they always brought me back. So I get the utmost respect for the pilots and the flight mech. The jobs they do are as hard, if not harder, than what I have to do. And so big shout out to them, they're amazing. But the pilot has to time his up and down, and he has to start syncing himself with the waves that are underneath him. And then I'm in the door, and I have to start trying to decide, once I get the signal, which is 3 taps to jump, then I decide I can jump anytime I want. So now the pilot says, deploy the swimmer. I get the taps. The flight mechanics, let's go. I'm on the edge of the door. My fins are out in front of me, and I'm waiting, because if I miscalculate, normally we like to jump at like 15 feet. And he's trying to get this helicopter down in time with these waves at 15 feet that are violent and chaotic. And I'm trying to time when I jump so I don't go from 15 to 30 or 45 feet, which has happened to some swimmers. And by the grace of God, we timed it. And when I jumped, it was probably a 20, 25-foot jump, and it was fine. But when I hit and went underwater, and I mean, I could just feel myself tumbling already, like when you get caught in that whitewash, because it was just so, the waves were not organized. It was chaotic. And as they rose up, I came to the surface, and I was already on a crest looking down at the helicopter now. He had deployed me, and that wave was actually above the helicopter, and he had to pull back up as the waves moved. And that was an eerie feeling, to be above the helicopter I had just jumped out of, looking at it. And then the raft was down here, and then that all changed as the waves moved. So I swam, as I was swimming to the raft, and they try to drop us upwind, because trying to swim in that, a couple of times they might have to drop the hook and drag me over to it, because it's some swimmers can swim for an hour and not make any headway at all. I saw a guy who was not in the raft. There were 2 men in the raft, and there was one guy, and by himself to my left, who I immediately turned to go for, and he had not gotten his Gumby suit fully on. So his Gumby suit was around his waist, filled with water, and he was so hyperthermic he couldn't use his hands anymore, so he was stumbling and trying to stay afloat. So I swam to him, got to him. He couldn't talk, he was mumbling, he was so hypothermic. And about that time, I looked up, and a wave had hit both of us, and I just held him as we tumbled. and it blew the Gumby suit completely off him. And the Gumby suit's a large neoprene suit that they carry on boats, especially up here in the Northwest, that if you go in the water, if you get in the Gumby suit, you can last some hours in this frigid water in that suit. But if you don't get in the suit, 15 minutes, you're probably going to die. So it blew the suit off of him. I immediately waved for a basket, and a basket came down, and I put this gentleman in it and got him hoisted up, and I made my way to the raft, and I swam for about a half hour, and I finally made it to the raft. And now I had to tell these guys one at a time, they had to jump in the water so I could grab them, take them away from the raft, and put them in a basket. They actually seemed pretty excited about that, just to get out of the water. So I didn't know how it was going to go, but they were excited. So I had each gentleman jump in the water. I grabbed them and I towed them away from the raft, put them in the basket, hoisted them up, and with, again, the pilots trying to time the waves and the flight mechanics, amazing job in those kind of conditions. I got both of the survivors into the helicopter, and now I needed to go over to the raft, and we carried a switchblade that Master Chief Jellicoska had requisitioned for us that was amazing. We pulled this little switchblade out and looked like we knew what we were doing. But we had to, I had to stab that raft and sink it, because 2 days from now that raft could be 40 miles away and we might get launched out again to go rescue somebody in that raft. So, you know, it was kind of you feel kind of bad because you know this raft just saved these people's lives, but you know its use was over. And so I stabbed it about a half dozen times, let it sink. And then I looked back at the helicopter and gave the ready for pickup. Ideally, because I have so much equipment on, I'm wearing a vest with a lot of survival equipment in it. I've got a seat harness on, a helmet. I've got long black fins, big insulated gloves. I'm wearing a dry suit I'm wearing fleece underneath that dry suit, so I'm pretty warm. Even in the worst conditions in Alaska, I could stay warm for a few hours in there. Ideally, they drop a hook, and I hook it to my harness and hoist up. But I think because there were two people in there and he had the basket, he just pushed that out right away. And so the basket came down and landed right near me, which was amazing in those conditions. But it was not my choice to get into a basket with all this equipment. It's just too confining to try and get into it. But the situation I was in with the waves and water, I thought, well, I need to get out of here. So I was shoving myself into this basket, finally got my fins in, pulling them back, squeezing in, and that basket you saw has two flotation devices on each side, and it's a cage. And then it comes up to where the hook hooks in. And it doesn't really keep you afloat that well, but it started to sink. And about this time, a huge wave hit me, and I did a little research. They were saying that a wave about the size that hit me, from my research, was about the equivalent of an elephant landing on top of me in the basket. And the flight mechanic and the helicopter didn't know what to do, so they just paid out slack. What they didn't know is that I was in a tumble, and so the cable came down and had wrapped, so I'm inside the basket, and it had wrapped me and the basket up with the cable. And I stopped for a moment, upside down, underwater, wrapped up, with the wave still crashing and whitewatering on me, and that's it. I thought, this is it. I finally, my card was punched. And somehow the mech pulled a little bit of tension, but it was like a yo-yo at the end of it, and the wave was receding, and I spun out at the bottom of this thing while I was still in the cage, and drank water, gagging, and broke free of the ocean and took just a gigantic breath. And in the heat of that moment, the mechanic jerked me out of the water. And when he jerked me out of the water, the basket hanging from the helicopter becomes like a pendulum. And so the helicopter was off center, and when I broke free, I immediately swung up to where I was looking at the pilots. And again, that's not where I wanted to be at this time and moment. But what I really thought about as I saw the pilots and I saw their oh shit face, I now swung all the way back around and was looking at the tail rotor, which was even more daunting than being in the front of the aircraft. And I don't know how the flight mechanic did it, but he was able to get me back under control and up into the cabin, and I hugged him when I got into the cabin. I would have hugged the pilots too, but I figured they were busy. But that, by far, out of all the rescues I did, and you'll read about it if you get the book or listen to the audio. I had amazing cases where I did these, in the redwood forest and getting lower down and picking up medevacs and delivering babies, and it was just all this crazy stuff. But that day and that time, I thought that was going to be it for me. And so, is there one more slide? So that was my last flight in the Coast Guard at Air Station Kodiak. I took a commission as a warrant officer, and in the Coast Guard's almighty knowing, they sent me to become a marine inspector. So for my last 6 years, I inspected ships, which I'm not sure why that's where they would send me. And I was a horrible marine inspector, and I decided at that point that it might be time to get out of the Coast Guard. And so I retired after, actually they recalled me back my last year to aviation was for Hurricane Katrina. And I had been involved in a couple of crashes with some crewmen I worked with, and so I joined part of the critical incident stress debriefing teams, and I would go in after an accident and help the surviving crewmen cope with all the intricacies of what they were involved in, so that hopefully someday it wouldn't go on to be PTSD and metastasize. So I was fortunate. My last year in the Coast Guard, I was in charge of the whole Gulf Coast and doing all the critical incident stress debriefings for all the air crews that were involved in Katrina, and spent quite a bit of time down in Katrina during that time. So it was a great way to end my career. And I think that's all I have. This is the painting I did for the Coast Guard art program. They don't have it here. When they get to select 50, and she didn't know that I would be a speaker here, so I have one that's my own that I keep, and I'm working on a new one for this year to submit. It's a donation to the Coast Guard, and then it travels around. And so I just like to stay involved with the Coast Guard wherever I can and do whatever I can, and I love telling Coast Guard stories. So I'll open it up for a couple of questions, and then there's still refreshments over here, cheese, and then I have some books and t-shirts for sale if anybody is interested, and you can also get it on Amazon. And in about 4 or 5 months, if I get it together, the audio will be out as well. No, thanks. Well, you can see the hook means a lot to me. That's just a photograph of one of the swimmers took it, and I got permission from him to paint it, and it's now traveling the nation somewhere. So,
would you mind grabbing it and bringing it into frame so maybe
yes.
you got in the video?
Did I just disappear?
Yes, you did. And once again.
Dang it.
And you're back.
So it's funny because I always put all these little tabs because I'm going to read these different sections, and my girlfriend will tell you once I get talking, I never make it to the book. Yes.
How do you put somebody in the basket?
Well, somebody without fins, mask, and snorkel and all that stuff is easy. You kind of slide them in and twist them. So you float them into the part of the basket that's sunk. It sinks. The little flotations keep it just above the water, so you have just the bales above you. So when you slide them in and turn them, and then they usually instinctively collapse their legs and they fit nicely. We've had 2 people in one before, and they've even had, I know, a mom and a baby off a sailboat was rescued. So it'll hold up to 600 pounds. So.
Does anybody ever fall out of it?
Haven't fallen out of that. We do a double strap pickup where I can put a strap around someone. It's a lot quicker, and pick them up together. And so this strap that's kind of hanging right here, I would wrap around you and then cinch it down and kind of hold you, and we'd go up together. It's really quick, and might have worked in that scenario I was in. But the basket, I can usually signal what I want, but in that situation it was so hectic, whatever came down I was going to use. But yeah, they did drop, I think a woman in Humboldt Bay fell about 40 feet, and but she survived. She was fine.
So when you were in that ocean and you were taking your knife out and going at the raft, I mean, did it feel like that was your safety device that you were like just putting down?
No, not so much that. It's just as an aviation survivalman, our job is to pack the rafts that are in all the aircraft. And so we have kind of a love-hate relationship with the raft. And so I felt just really bad about this really nice, and plus I know it had saved their lives. And now I have to destroy it and sink it. As I swam away, it looked like a little children's toy that was in the yard sinking. And it was just a horrible way.
I thought that you might not.
No. Well, they have a swimmer was left behind. Mike Odom was left off the coast of North Carolina. The cable, he was in such a violent storm that the cable started to ride on the edge of the helicopter and separated it. And now we have a way to splice things onto that cable, or we even have rope that we can lower down, and we have a capstan that we can put on the deck of the helicopter, created after this case. But he was left out there for 6 hours, and he actually tied himself to the raft, and there was a C-130 out there circling while they went to get another helicopter, which was 6 hours later. And he said he tied himself to the raft so he figured somebody would find the body, but he survived also. He's a good friend of mine. So yeah, no, we've learned from certain things like that. And when I first came in the Coast Guard, they didn't have this seat harness. We had a chest harness, and to this day I have tons of back problems that, because of not having the support of my whole spine. It was just up here on my chest, and getting yanked out of the water, you wrench your back out pretty easily. So, the equipment they have now, when we were up in Kodiak, I visited the shop up there. It was amazing. I was drooling at all their toys. So. We only do the Canadians and the British and some other services will carry 2 swimmers. We only fly with 1 swimmer, 1 flight mechanic, 2 pilots, and occasionally we bring a corpsman or a flight surgeon with us, depending on the situation. But all the rescue swimmers are EMT qualified, so we're able to provide medical. And occasionally up in Alaska, if they know what the case is, they might take 2 swimmers because they have a lot of them up there. But some of the other smaller stations don't have the manpower to do it.
In context of the AI editing, how confident are you technically, and was that a difficult thing to handle?
No, you just got to learn the different prompts, and then sometimes you got to learn that the AI just gets it wrong. So if you weren't here earlier, I had tried working with an editor, and it had taken quite a bit, and I had gotten into the AI stuff and used it, creating the prompts to make it be my editor, keeping in my voice, my tone, but just to clean up the grammar, sentence structure issues. So it was amazing, yeah.
Does the suit provide a lot of flotation for you?
It does. Not a lot, some. But we also have a vest that we could pull a toggle and inflate it. But it does provide some. But it seems like the longer out there working, it seems to get sucked into you, and the air seems to get worked out, and you start to lose some of that buoyancy.
What do you guys do for someone that's severely hypothermic, like if they want compression?
S-
Special equipment?
For hypothermic, we do. We carry a thermal recovery capsule, which is basically a sleeping bag made of sheepskin or sheep's fur or something like that. They probably have amazing things now, but we could put them in that capsule and rewarm them that way. I had a person on the deck who, in California, who was hyperthermic, and the fishing boat had picked him up, and I swam over to the fishing boat, but the waves were so big I had to time it until the stern came down, and I reached up and two fishermen grabbed me, and then the whole stern came out of the water and they flipped me onto the deck because it was about, those were like 8 to 10 footers, but the big rollers. And while I was getting my composure, somebody had went and heated up a sleeping bag or a quilt, and as I looked up, they were walking over to put it on the hyperthermic person. It was steaming. And the worst thing you can do, you have to rewarm slowly, otherwise that cold blood will shoot right into the heart and kill them. And so, and it's loud, the engine's running, and I'm trying to yell, and I'm running with fins on the deck, and I finally got on my knees, and I was crawling and was trying to tell them to not put the hot blanket on the survivor, or you're going to kill them. So, yeah. That story's in the book too, by the way.
So they didn't get the blanket on. You got to that time.
Say that again?
They didn't get the blanket on him.
No, they didn't get the blanket on him. No, he survived as well too. Oh, and I will note on that case in Kodiak, we saved 2 in a raft, 1 free floating, and then 1 gentleman died. So we never recovered. One more, huh?
Had you seen the guy that was not recovered? Was he ever identified in the ocean?
I don't think so. No.
Was doing the raft on the
Yeah, I have heard stories of many years later them finding parts of a body or shirt and being able to identify it back to a boat that sunk somewhere earlier or an aircraft crash or something too. One more question. All right. Oh.
You don't have, you just have the snorkel, you don't have your tank?
No, we're totally surface swimmers. A matter of fact, our regulations state that we cannot go in an upside down boat or into a vessel that's underwater. We totally stay on the surface. Now that may have changed. I've been out a few years, 18 now since I retired, and but no tanks, none of that stuff. We do carry a small little scuba tank for our own egress out of the aircraft. The aircraft is top heavy, all the engines and everything are on the top, and so if you crash in the water, more than likely it's going to roll upside down and sink fast. And we're trained, every 4 years we go to the Navy Dunker, we get in a big tank, and I hated it. Every 4 years we had to do it, and they drop you, flip you upside down. But we can pull this little oxygen tank out, put it in our mouth, and it gives us up to 4 minutes of breathing time, and we're able to try and Coast Guard aviators have escaped from aircraft that have crashed in the water thanks to that little scuba tank. It provides them just that little more comfort knowing they're breathing, and that time to get out of the aircraft, because it's sinking pretty good. They inflate automatically, or the pilot can initiate them. They have big balloons or big flotation devices on each side of the aircraft that inflate to help to try and slow it, because it's heavy and it's sinking.
Just a quick question. So how often is the fuel a problem?
A lot. The fuel's a problem a lot, just because of where we're going. We can hover, how far we have to go, if we have to refuel. So not so much with this aircraft. The Coast Guard has a smaller one, a 65. It's constantly a problem. They can hardly do. They're getting rid of them. They're phasing them all out and going to just that 60 that you saw. But fuel is always a problem. I mean, it's weight, it's time, it's how far we can go, and we're constantly monitoring it. I even have a repeater in the back where my seat is that I'm monitoring it, as well as the pilots, so we're all keeping an eye on it. So.
Is the fuel jelly at all?
No.
Or
All right, well, that's it, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.